So welcome to Team DataFam Tableau User Group meeting number 40. This tug works a little bit differently to others, where we cater for more the presenter rather than the audience. So we meet at a whole heap of different times to get the best presenters around the world. Then we have problems like last week, where one presenter drops out, which is our entire tug, and we've got to drop the whole tug. So that's just the risk that I always knew was there. Apologies about last week. We'll reschedule that for sometime in the future as well. But obviously, because we've got different presenters from around the world, we can have a wide range of topics, sometimes TC25 topics, sometimes Visit Sydney or at other conferences. But you don't have to present at a conference. If you've got something that you would like to present, we can find a time slot for you. Just email me at team.datafam@gmail.com and we'll sort that process out and find a time slot that suits you and me, obviously. Today we've got Fraser presenting from TC25 about Ready, Set, Build, crafting custom dashboard checklists. Obviously, I don't know what it's about. He knows what's it about. So I'll hand it over to you and you can take it from here.
All right. Well, first of all, before I get into anything too deep here, I'm just going to say, thank you to everyone for showing up today and attending the talk. One of the most remarkable things I think about Tableau as a product is just the DataFam and the the following that the product has. I think this is something that's kind of unique and doesn't exist with any other kind of products. Just that like we have so many fans and a family around this tool that we use in our work every day. So thank you everyone for the support and being part of this presentation today. I'm Fraser. I guess a little bit about me. I started, as a software developer and computing science background, and about 10 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, 12 years ago, somebody had said to me, "Have you checked out Tableau? Have you heard of this Tableau product?" And so what I did is, I took some time, got it installed, and connected up to one of the databases that we had built and we work with. And within like 30 minutes, I was like visualizing stuff, and like it was literal, light bulb moments. I thought, this is cool. I want to work with this. And so now, I'm more of a Tableau consultant, working with Tableau most of the time, as well as other BI tools like Power BI. But that's kind of what I do day to day now. So that's, I think, been a really kind of fun transition for me to kind of change gears from just writing code. I tend to spend a lot of time on the data problems and maybe more on Tableau prep than anything else. But maybe not so much these days. I'm doing more Salesforce-y type stuff with Data Cloud and some of the new ways to connect to data. One of my hobbies is playing around with electronics and vintage electronics, and so I've got a bit of a vintage Sony collection going. I was in Japan last month and picked up an old PSP device and immediately hacked it and started doing some fun stuff with that. So playing with old electronics is definitely my biggest hobby at the moment. And of course, I got my family. We've got my little son is in the background here. He's got a teacher strike this week, so he's hanging out with me and watching Minecraft movies on TV. So if you hear the giggling in the background, he's enjoying free TV time while I do my work today. So this presentation the content was originally created for Tableau conference this year. At the beginning of the year, I was able to present at Tableau conference. This was actually a special year for me in regards to Tableau conference, because it was my 10th anniversary of going to Tableau conference every year. So that's, if for those to be technically correct, it's 8 in-person Tableau conferences and 2 virtual, but it is my 10th in a row of Tableau conference. Since then, I've presented this a couple other times and kind of just revised and updated some of the content and refined it a little bit since then. But it was very special for me to be able to present. It was my first Tableau conference where I was a presenter, so this is kind of near and dear to me. And it was a bit of a bucket list thing to be able to present at the conference. So kind of talking about checklists and the topic for today, might want to ask why Fraser? Why am I presenting? Why am I talking about this stuff? One of the things I do, part of my job, part of my work is actually judging, other people's work. So lots of times I'm kind of the more senior person. I'm in kind of the position where I'm reviewing associates' work. So if people are doing drafts, I'm kind of reviewing that and kind of providing feedback. Often we'll also get asked to look at clients' existing dashboards or some of the stuff that maybe they've done in-house, or people have built in Excel and try to turn that into best practices and better dashboards. So it's really tied to the work that I'm doing every day. And then the other thing, because I'm a Tableau ambassador, I've had kind of this opportunity to be an Iron Viz qualifier judge. And so I've been doing that for 3 years now. And that was actually kind of the start of the checklist journey for me and kind of implementing that in the day-to-day work. So both of those things kind of tie into the content and why I'm here kind of presenting this today. So what do I mean when I talk about checklist? And very literally, I'm talking about a checklist, right? So in our case, it's a Word document, but we're actually we have a Word document where we go through and we mark things, check them off as we complete them, mark them as X's as they're not followed with comments. But it doesn't have to be anything more complicated than this. Some people might think, well, we need to build a tool for it. With Iron Viz, it's a Google form that we fill out to do the judging, but it doesn't have to be anything really, fancy. Just a basic document is really all you need to create your checklist. You don't need any kind of specialized tools. So why do we need a checklist? Well, the first thing I think, as a data analyst and being in this position, I think it's really important for us to deliver a high quality product. So just kind of thinking about, we want to do our best, we want to put our best foot forward and deliver that high quality product to either it's a customer, or it could be an end user if you're just working for a company rather than being a consultant like me. But either way, they're our customers and we want to deliver the best product to them. Second one here is consistency in your work and doing that consistent high level, high quality product. Again, as a data analyst, we've got lots of pressures, we've got lots of projects typically going on at the same time, and lots of things to remember. So the checklist is a way that we can also be consistent in our work and make sure that we don't forget anything as we go through our day-to-day and we check all those boxes so that we're not forgetting anything. And then the third one is, a lot of us aren't just a single data analyst working all by ourselves. We're working in teams. So the checklist is a way that we can share standards. Sometimes, we've also been in the position where, a larger customer has hired us as a consultant, but then they've also got other consultants that they're working with. They've got internal people. So the checklist is a way that we can share standards across, multiple organizations and make sure that, the product is the same product regardless of, who created it. So today's talk, we're going to start and we're going to talk a little bit about Iron Viz because this was kind of the start of the checklist journey for me. Then we'll get into some real world applications, how we're using it at work every day, a bit of a deep dive on how you can create your own checklist and refine your own checklist, and then finally how you can integrate it into your workflow. So Iron Viz, if you're not aware, is an annual competition that is put on by Tableau. I think it used to be, they said that the tagline was the world's largest data visualization competition. Now it's the world's ultimate data visualization competition. Maybe largest was not okay from the lawyer's perspective, but as far as I know, it's the only data visualization competition that spans the globe. But either way, the way it works is in October, which is, it says mid-October on here, where we were saying just before we started the presentation that it's already October 20th, and this hasn't happened yet. But any minute now, we should see an announcement saying that there's going to be a kickoff event happening where they announce the theme. And so the way it works is that, they announce the theme, and people have time to prepare their entries for Iron Viz. You can use any data that you want for your Iron Viz entry. It just has to somehow adhere to the theme, and your dashboard and your Viz that you create has to adhere to the theme. Iron Viz only gets about 200 entries. So if you think, well, I'd like to enter, I'd like to participate in this, but there's no chance I'm going to be in the top 10. Well, it's actually statistically, you have a pretty good chance that you could be in the top 10s because there's only around 200 entries. Once the entries are entered at the end of November, that's when the qualifier judges, so I'm one of the qualifier judges, that we kick in and we review all the dashboards. And then in January, the top 10 will be announced, and then the top 3 will continue on. One of the things, if you do enter Iron Viz, and you should make sure that you request your score and your feedback. So when the judges are reviewing your Viz, we'll actually enter comments onto the scorecard, and they won't give you that, I believe, unless you request it. So make sure you request your score and get your feedback, because if you're not in the top 10, they'll often give you where you need to work on to get into the top 10 next year. And then the big stage, the finals for Iron Viz are at Tableau Conference. So in April, you'll have the opportunity to compete and be the champion in front of 10,000 people at the conference. So it's a very fast, you only get a month to kind of do your qualifier entry, and then from January to April is also a very kind of short time to refine and put together your final entry. Iron Viz, I think this is kind of half made up. My quote for Andy here, but one of his things is the it depends. And when we're judging, we're not deciding what's the best chart or kind of saying you did the wrong chart. When we're judging, we have criteria that we follow, and the way that it works is everything gets scored on the same scale. So 0 would be completely failed, 5 would be outstanding. You can kind of see that 4 is successful, and so if you kind of did something the right way, you would get a 4. But to be in the top 3, you got to get a bunch of 5s. And so it's only 1 point different between being successful and outstanding, but it's the outstanding guys that are going to be in the top 10 and the top 3. And so there's kind of 3 different sections on the scorecard for Iron Viz. The first section deals with design. So it's looking at things like accessibility, use of images, font size. If everything is an image, that doesn't work for accessibility because screen readers and people can't see. Now we have ChatGPT that can go and read text and images, but it creates accessibility considerations. Having really small font sizes that are just unreadable, that's going to lose you some points. Making your Viz user-friendly and easy to navigate. I've judged ones where I had to look for navigation buttons and couldn't find them. So just making it very clear and easy how to navigate and work with your Viz is really important. And clearly presenting data. So making sure you have titles on all your graphs, labels where necessary. Those are all important things to score well for design. The second section of the scorecard is dealing with storytelling. So one of the important things when you're creating an Iron Viz entry is to establish that narrative and tell a story. So it's really more about posing a question, doing an analysis around that question, and coming to conclusions or insights. So storytelling is kind of one of the keys to successful Iron Viz and having that narrative. The third area is about analysis. And because you can use any data that you want in your Iron Viz entry, when we're judging it, we don't spend a lot of time typically like looking at your data set and that you're using a good data set. We're more looking at the results. It's really that your analysis is more aligned with your storytelling and your narrative. I think one of the really important things here is using Tableau's capabilities and strengths. So if you're doing an Iron Viz entry that's just a lot of bar charts, although bar chart is the most versatile and best visualization, in my opinion, if it's all bar charts, you're not going to be marked highly, right? Like that's mediocre in terms of like the point scale. You have to really like do some, non out of the box chart types to get that outstanding mark when you're doing your analysis. So, for Iron Viz, we're going through and this is essentially a checklist, right? Like we're going through and marking you and giving you points kind of based on how well you did the different things on that checklist. And so this year, one of the ones that I judged was this Wellerman Viz that Anne had created. And you can kind of use the QR code and go and take a look at it if you want. But the way that the judging typically happens is that, each of the judges might be assigned, 20 visualizations that we have to take a look at. And we're spending, 15 to 30 minutes judging each one. In the case of this one in particular, it was kind of clear within 5 minutes that this was a very well done, very, very good viz. And so, I kind of the ones that I judged this year, this was maybe one of the best. And so it did get that outstanding mark kind of in many different categories. And obviously it got in the top 10. Each of the vizes that get entered into the qualifier round, I think it's 3 judges. So it's not just one judge, it's 3 judges that would see your entry and mark your entry. And of course, I didn't get to see Beau's qualifier entry as part of my judging, but his actual entry in the final, and that was just, I thought that was quite amazing and quite well. It's always enjoyable to kind of watch the Iron Viz live. You can go back if you haven't seen it before. A lot of the past ones are available online, so you can watch the videos for those. So Iron Viz, like I said, this was the kind of the start of the checklist for me. So after I had judged, I kind of thought, these are really good. Like the way that we review and we mark these vizes, like how can we incorporate this in our day-to-day work? So that's kind of where the path started to cross a little bit for me. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about kind of some of the work applications of the checklist. So when I was thinking about this and kind of reviewing my slides and everything, one of the things I didn't mention before in the other versions of this talk is kind of the tools that we kind of use to define our project, because the checklist is really about building and getting your dashboard and your viz into production. We don't really talk about like specific requirements and fulfilling requirements in the checklist. And for us at Onware, that's the project charter's job. So as part of the sales cycle, we're actually creating this document that's kind of describing what we're doing, what's going to be in scope, what's out of scope, assumptions that we have. And this kind of forms the requirements for what we build. So this is kind of the starting place. And I'm not going to talk too much about it, but I just wanted to mention it as like another tool that we use. We start with this, we start doing our build, and then the checklist kind of comes in after we've built our drafts out and actually started building something in Tableau. So talking about how we start and our project and want to get that to production. It really starts with prototype development. Sometimes we'll create wireframes. We tend to want to just start building our drafts in Tableau and iterating on those drafts. But it always is going to start with prototype development, and then probably publishing it to the server for review to get feedback from a wider audience. after we do that, we iterate, we work with our clients, we refine, we improve what we're doing. And then, finally, we may have some testing. We're going to publish it into production, might be doing some training. So, that's very typical cycle. So, when I was kind of getting started with Tableau, I was building a dashboard, and I was using a data set that I knew really, really well. Inside and out. I had helped build the database many years earlier, so I knew the data inside and out, and I built this really beautiful dashboard and kind of put it all together and published it on the server, and then went over to the client's office to present it to them. So I brought it up on the screen and showed it to the customer, and this was his reaction. He said, "That's a great visual, but what am I looking at?" And so I was really kind of taken down a couple pegs when I got that reaction, because it was like, I made this beautiful visual. I have all these nice insights on the data. But what I had forgotten was I didn't actually put any titles on my graphs. So I had kind of failed in that respect, because the customer saw all these nice visuals, but he had no idea what he was looking at. In this case, it was a good long-term customer, so I was able to go and iterate and improve and make it better for him. But you don't always get that chance. So thinking about the checklist, and how do we judge our work? Well, this is exactly the same as the Iron Viz. So for design, we need to think about the same things, right? Like font sizes. Is it easy to navigate? Clearly presenting data with titles, labels, etc. That's where I failed when I presented to the customer. So, if I had the checklist in place at that time, I wouldn't have had to suffer like I did with presenting something to the customer that was not really intuitive for him. Now, if you think back to this slide for Iron Viz, the second column here was storytelling. When we're dealing with work, it's really less about storytelling and more about answering questions. So, are we meeting customer requirements? Thinking back to that idea of the project charter, are we doing what we set out at the beginning of the project in our work? Are we answering questions at a glance? Are we giving insights to the customer that they don't have to dig for? Because that's one of the the key selling points of using Tableau as a tool, is that you're answering those questions without them having to dig for them. Is the user able to filter and work with the results? So, not just necessarily having a bunch of bands and high level numbers, but being able to dig deeper and look at different ways that are just important for the client to give that interactive experience. And then when it comes to analysis, it's also a little bit different than Iron Viz. With Iron Viz, we're looking at static data for the most part, but when we're doing business type dashboards, the number one question I think is probably, when was the data refreshed? They want to know how recent it is, how good that data is, and have some confidence in it. Another one is, do the numbers seem reasonable? Thinking about that as part of the build process. If you're building, a sales dashboard and you're showing revenue numbers, and then you're going and presenting that to the CFO or the sales leadership, they know exactly what their revenue numbers are. So if you don't have reasonable stuff on your dashboard, people are going to see that immediately and they're going to call that out. So you got to make sure that's correct before you show it to end users. And then the last piece on here, providing enough detail through drill down. Sadly, that typically means, data tables. Even more sadly, probably the customer is going to take those data tables and export them into Excel. But that's something that we need to do, is just providing that detail. It really helps to provide or to build trust in what we're presenting if users can drill down and see the detail behind the number, behind the graphs and business that we're creating. And kind of like I said in my experience with the customer, if we're successful, the CFO loves the dashboard, he's going to start pushing other people to use it. He's going to go and want more questions answered. You're going to get more work. and you're going to become more valuable as a data analyst if you're having these successes in front of your customer. And it's really just a success or a fail, right? Like if you don't answer the questions, if you don't give the detail desired, you're going to have to go back and rework and iterate and refine what you've created. So, unlike Iron Viz, where you've got like a 5-point scale, it's not quite as forgiving for work always. So, this is kind of why we have an Iron Viz checklist, why we have a work checklist. So now I'm going to kind of get into some of the detail of what we have on our checklist and kind of why. So, like I said, mine started with Iron Viz. So I took the Iron Viz judging criteria and I pasted that into a document and created like a draft checklist. And then after that, I shared it with the rest of my team. So, they came back and they added questions. They said, Fraser, you're crazy. We don't need this on our checklist, and took out some of the stuff that I had put in there. But we all kind of worked together to make a checklist that works for everybody. And that's pretty comprehensive, I think. The other one that I want to mention here is that if you have a new client, really think about making a client-specific version of the checklist, and I'll kind of touch on this a couple of other times, but you don't need to necessarily just have one. You can have multiple versions of your checklist. And then the third piece here is also, the checklist is not a secret. I used to, at the very beginning, think, maybe this is like a secret sauce that we have that makes us better than other Tableau consultants. But that's not really the case. Everybody's thinking about these same things. So, it's okay to share it and it's okay to give back. The other one is also give it to clients. By the fact that you've created this tool, this also shows to the client that you know what you're doing and you're a really good data analyst and you're thinking about these things. It's okay to share with your clients. So that's something that you might want to consider. And then the last piece is that, the checklist is not limited to Tableau. So you could potentially use the checklist with other BI tools like Power BI. We use our same checklist for both. Or even like Excel. If you're doing work with Excel, you could potentially use elements of the checklist on the Excel work. So some of these examples, they may not fit your situation. You may not agree with me on some of these things. And think about ones that you can use and kind of fit in your situation if that's the case. It's really just, guidelines and ideas here at this point. But the first one here was data accuracy. So the first section of our checklist is kind of centered around data accuracy. Making sure that the row level, like the lowest level of data in your data source, is validated against a source of truth. If you don't have it right at that lowest level of detail, nothing else is going to be right on your dashboard, right? Any of the aggregations, any of the analysis that you're doing, you got to get that row level correct first. The other one is on here that I think is really important is the key numbers that are aligning. So like when you're creating bands and then detail tables, it's really important that you kind of go through this on every tab of your dashboard and make sure that those numbers align. Like you can see here, my month to date hours, something's wrong there, right? Those numbers are not matching with each other. So I've obviously got a filter problem, right? But if you don't go through and do that before you present to users, they're going to catch that. They're going to lose trust in the data and the analysis that you're doing. Which number is right? Is it the top one? Is it the bottom one? You got to go through and make sure that everything aligns before you present. Second section that we have is about style and branding. So this kind of gets into like the idea of the client-specific checklist, and are you using brand colors? Do they want to see a logo on their dashboards? So kind of putting those kind of requirements into the checklist is good so that you remember those things. Talking about the background, what we say is typically we do like a white or a light colored background by default. We're not making dark mode dashboards. I think, and from a user experience perspective, dark mode and black are really meant for stuff that's going to be consumed on a big TV, not necessarily on the desktop, or if they're printing these out or using them for other purposes. Try to stick to white because it's the most universal. In terms of size here, if you think, on my desk at home or at the office, I've got like a 32-inch 4K screen. Very few people have 32-inch 4K screens. Think about the users that are going to be consuming your dashboard. They're probably on a 27-inch or smaller 1K monitor. So don't design it for your 4K monitor. Design it for that 1K monitor. So here's an example. I took this screenshot on my 4K screen. If you think about English, at least, everyone's reading left to right, top to bottom. So they're going to be focused in that top left corner of your dashboard. They're going to totally miss those filters that are on the top right corner. So, thinking about those kind of things, it takes about 2 seconds in desktop to drag those filters over to the left side. But then when the users are working with your dashboard, they're going to see those filters right away and be able to make use of those. Talking about understandability and navigation, this is actually the biggest part of our checklist. So I've got a couple slides here, and I'm only going to touch on a few of these. Talking about things like, I've already mentioned having titles displayed clearly and explaining what you're looking at. One of the ones that I have on here is this idea of I've got a cumulative score in a line chart. I've got all my data points labeled. I really don't need this score axis. I can go and turn that off, and that just makes my dashboard and my viz a little bit less cluttered. So things that are kind of redundant, that aren't useful, think about turning those off so that they're not adding distraction. The other one that I want to mention on here is just naming conventions. It says, where possible, use the tab names as the titles. And if you think about when you publish this to Tableau Online in the server, your tab names actually show up in the navigation on the site. So having your tab names being descriptive and matching what's in that view is quite important, just to make it easier if people are navigating on the Tableau server. Abbreviations, I think, is an important one. I've seen dashboards where they have case number, case no, case pound, all throughout the dashboard and used interchangeably. Think about being consistent and kind of agreeing with the client on what terms you're going to use for things, just so that you don't have this kind of idea of multiple ways of referring to the same thing. The point on here about aggregate numbers shown as integers, this is more kind of geared towards just thinking about how you're showing numbers, and you don't need to go down to the cents level. If you're doing a sales dashboard that's in the millions of dollars, you shouldn't be showing cents on those, because nobody really cares about that at that level. So just kind of keeping your numbers clean. That's why it says line level details show with the 2 decimals, because when you're down at the line level, you want to show the full detail. Another thing is currency, making sure you turn on that currency symbol, especially in dashboards where you're mixing things like quantities with dollars. Just having that currency symbol turned on makes it a little bit easier for the users to understand what they're looking at. More understandability and navigation. So, I put the example here. This is more around the idea that when you're building your draft, think about using realistic numbers, or the kind of numbers you're going to see when you publish it to the server. Because if you're designing it in this way, where everything gets cut off when you put it up against real data, you're going to have to go back and do rework. So just thinking about that kind of thing. On your graphs, whether you include zeros or not. Sometimes if you have the 0 turned on, it messes up your scaling. You don't get to see the changes in your views very well. So just thinking about, as part of the checklist, whether you include 0 or not. The other one here, understanding when to use time. Lots of times our data sources may have time included, but it's not really relevant to the analysis. So showing the time in your output is just adding clutter. So just thinking about that. The other one that we have here is use parameters to filter. We tend to build parameters to filter dates and set them to like intelligent defaults. Like I've used kind of the sales dashboard a few times here. The built-in dynamic ranges for Tableau of saying like, this month or last 3 months typically don't really work. If I say last 3 months, that's always including this month. And when you're trying to look at sales results, you're typically looking at the month that's closed or the week that's passed, and you don't want to include partial weeks or partial months. So just kind of parameters are a way to kind of get your date ranges kind of set intelligently and automatically. So, that's a whole talk on its own. But that's something that we often consider and end up implementing in our dashboards, and that's why it's on our checklists. Hidden filters. If you have hidden filters on your views, you may want to show that in your titles as like an explanation for the end user to know how that data is being displayed. So just kind of consider that. Removing redundant filters or unnecessary filters. This is just something as part of like the deployment stage, and when you get later on in your development, that you want to make sure that you keep your filters tray clean and don't have stuff in there that's not relevant. This is one of my pet peeves of Tableau in the screenshot here, that tooltips are on by default. I think personally that tooltip should be off by default. So when I'm building stuff, I tend to always go and turn off the tooltips whenever I create a new tab, and then I'll just turn it on if there's something additional or useful that I'm going to show on that tooltip. But just having the default ones, I feel like they get in the way. They don't add any information. They kind of distract when you're trying to use your mouse and point at things on the screen. So that's one. Action filters being tested thoroughly. For sure, something that should be on every checklist is that you've got to go through and test all your actions, make sure they're working the way that you want them to work. That's especially important if you're kind of refactoring a dashboard and going through and making changes, that you go and retest your action filters all the time before you present it to anyone, because that's something that can break easily. When it comes time to publishing, testing, we have a thing in our checklist that says cleanup. Go in and remove those tabs. You should never be publishing something to production that says sheet 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like in that screenshot there. Go and delete those tabs before you finish your work. Also go through and remove those debug and those prototype views, or hide them. If you really think you're going to use them again in the future, you can hide them, but I would get rid of them before you publish them. Again, it just adds kind of clutter, and if you come back to the dashboard a year or 2 years later, you're going to be asking yourself, where's this calculation used? I'm not sure if it's in use or not. And you'll have to spend time trying to figure out what you did in the past. So try to clean up as much as possible as you go, or at least before you publish. When it comes to testing, lots of times we're publishing into a testing folder, especially if it's a revision of something that we've previously created. One of the key things on here is removing the test version after validation. We've come back to customers 6 months later where that hasn't happened, and they're using the test version. Even though we've published a nice version into production, the test version is still in use. So make sure once everything's been validated and confirmed, you remove that test version from the server. And then finally, the idea of documentation and training. One of the things that we do is we'll create an About tab, and the About tab has things like information about the data source refreshes, about what the data sources are, definitions, so definitions of either some of the fields or the terms that are in use in the dashboard, or some of the calculations that are in use. These are all kind of things that, if somebody was like looking at your dashboard for the first time, they could go to the About tab and then, learn this kind of information, and then they don't need to see it again. Rather than having that information kind of sprinkled throughout and having text that's distracting kind of throughout your dashboard, you can move a lot of that stuff to the About tab. It doesn't necessarily have to be kind of front and center every time somebody looks at your dashboard. But those are kind of the key things that we have on our checklist, and I went fairly quickly through a lot of that. But let's kind of continue on and say, so now we've kind of built up this checklist. How can we integrate it into our workflow? And again, I got this quote from Google, so I don't know if it's actually true or not, but it sounds good. Tufte was an author that talked about design and visualizing information. So he talks about, there's bad design. So, lots of time from the beginning, we're thinking about the design of our dashboard and how we're going to present our information. I'd say just like design, you should also be thinking about your checklist from the start. So, as you start building and, you've got know that, once you are done, you're going to be going through your checklist. You can think about it so that you don't have to go back and do those things after the fact. So, now I always know, when I'm building something new, I make sure I put a nice title in it. I turn off my tooltips. I start doing that stuff all from the beginning. So when it comes time to do the checklist, it's just a very quick double check on everything. So that kind of leads into, when do I complete the checklist? So, the first place would be complete it on your own before you show anybody. So, once you think you have your draft ready to go, complete the checklist on your own. You should go back, just like I mentioned with your actions on your dashboard. After you make major changes, if you've made changes to your data source and swapped out your data source potentially, you got to go back through your checklist and make sure that you review those things because they will change. The other one is peer review. So, this is a give and take thing. The idea is that, I'll get some peers to review my work, and then I'll review their work later on. So, before you show the client, it's a lot easier to have it, reviewed by your colleague, and you have them give you feedback rather than showing something to the customer that's no good. Also, ahead of major milestones and deliveries, making sure that you have that review happen. We've had kind of cases where we've created dashboards, had them kind of reviewed by the client, but then we go to do a CFO presentation and some of the actions are not working in the dashboard, or, something is wrong. So again, just before you make those major deliveries, running through the checklist never hurts. And then the last piece here, the idea of client review. So we've actually got a column on our checklist for client review. So kind of at the end of the project, typically, we'll actually share the checklist with the client and ask them to kind of go through and check it off. That sometimes is a big ask, and it's not likely the client's going to go through to the same detail as I would or one of my colleagues. But again, it kind of shows them that you're a good data analyst and you know what you're doing and you're thinking about these things. So it helps to build trust with the client to kind of just share that you're doing this process and inviting them to take part in it. And so ultimately at the end of the day, we've done all this work. We've built these nice dashboards. We've built these checklists and checked our work before we share it. Who's the winner? Of course, you're the winner, whether it's going to be at work or it's as an Iron Viz contestant. But I think, as a data analyst, just kind of going through and having this be part of your toolkit and the process that you follow is going to help to elevate, what you're doing and the quality of your work. And that's really going to show to your customers and your audience. So this QR code, I hope, still works. If not, let me know and I can send you a link. But this is just to the Word document kind of template that I have for a checklist. So go ahead and take a picture of that, and feel free to take it and work on it and change it as much as you like. But that's it. That's kind of all I had in the presentation for today. So I think we have some time for Q&A, and
that document still works. Anne clicked on it and I clicked on it. So that was sort
okay,
of like my
perfect.
first question was how do you keep track of that stuff? But you answered it anyway. It was because you've got it in a Word document. So you're saying every revision
simple, right?
Yes. But every revision of your workbook, you go through that checklist again. So you've got like, do you archive all those changes as well?
We'll just like edit the Word document and put more columns in if we need to,
okay.
or comments. Yeah.
And one of the questions asked me privately, so I'm asking this for Gayantha, is there any way to compare two workbooks together? So if you've got an older version and a newer version, can you compare those workbooks to see the differences or the changes?
I would probably just open them up separately, like on two screens, on two tabs. That's kind of what we, tend to do, is like if it's like we're revising something that we've made before, we'll just have, the new one that we're working on open in desktop, and then we'll open up like the web and look at, the numbers on the two and compare them. There's not really an automated tool. But that's kind of, I think, one of the challenges that we want to make sure that we do is, when we're revising something, it matches and it aligns with the one that we did before. Like we're actually just doing a project like that right now. It's a KPI dashboard for a customer, and this is like the third time that they've come to us to refine it, and like it's kind of the third major revision of it over like maybe 5 years now that we've been working on this, and that's where like things like cleanup and like, we on this third revision we've actually had to go back and do some cleanup, right? Because we've, over the 5 years, we've stopped using calculated fields, or we've changed the data source. And so one of the components was to like make it clean so that you can continue to maintain it going into the future, right?
Yeah, I had an issue recently, or an issue where a client's going, oh, the new version of the dashboard, the data's wrong. And I was I hadn't worked on the dashboard previously. I'm picking up someone else's work. And the first thing on my checklist after a while was go back and see what the old dashboard did, because they're actually complaining about data and formatting and stuff that was always there. But now they see that I can change things. Is they're trying to change like previous errors, not introduce errors, if that's, if there is a difference there. That's always good.
That's not unheard of, that the old dashboard may have had an error and you've already fixed it in the new dashboard.
Yeah.
Which is bad. Like it's bad if something's out there like that, but it does happen, right?
Yep. Someone was saying a useful item on our checklist is to check that the data source is limited to only the period of time that's needed for the data questions. Otherwise, it can be easy for developers to default to including all the available years of data when sometimes only the past year or two of the data is actually needed. Yeah, definitely. That's sort of the guideline of only including the data that you need included.
And it's sometimes tough to find the balance, because you want to be able to like give that ability to kind of look back. But if somebody's been using a database for 15 years, you don't need the data from 15 years ago. Maybe you just need 5 years, and that's like the most that anybody's ever going to look at. We've actually had cases where we're doing like, looking at backlogs and things like that. We find that our Tableau prep flow is based on the data set, like 200 million rows is kind of like pushing the limits of what we can do with a Tableau data extract. So that's kind of limiting how much data we have in our data source and available.
Yeah, and I've also seen that with performance as well. If you've got 5 years of data, you don't need to have it down to the second level. You could have it at day level. So a data source that reaches back a longer period of time, that's just a day. But your recent, what is recent, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, etc., That's down to the second of the day. So you can do both types of analysis if you need to as well.
Yeah.
Jeff was asking about the QR code. Fraser can probably grab the link. I can't at the moment. What it will be is in the recording later on. So if you go back to the link on the user groups Tableau site or to the YouTube recording, I'll put the link in there as well so you can access it easily. That's
probably the easiest. It's like an ugly. I think it's an ugly link too.
Yeah, it sort of looked a bit funny when
because it's it's like in OneDrive. Yeah. So
yeah, that's cool. If you want to get in touch with Fraser, LinkedIn or X. Okay, so I'm still sort of like trying to pad time for Tableau to post about IronViz, but maybe it won't happen at all. Okay, so the next section is Fast 5. As I said before, quick questions, quick answers. I prompt AI because for every different tug, we've got different questions. Sometimes I try and align them to the topic, sometimes I don't, but it's not meant to be serious at all. Just a quick answer. A lot of them are personal preference. If you want to pass, just say pass. It's easy.
Okay.
The question 1 is, what design or visualization principles do you always try to follow in Tableau?
Keep it simple, right? Like it's, lots of times we create stuff because we think it is really cool and it doesn't necessarily resonate with the customer. Like that simple bar chart is super powerful and works in many situations. I was on a retail tug a few weeks ago, and they were doing the Viz Tsukurima show, which is the Japanese kind of recreate the Viz as quickly as you can. And one of the ones that they had done was a bump chart. And my comment on that was like, I really want to do a bump chart with a customer, but whenever I do, like they're like, no, I'm not interested in that. Like I think it's one of these, really we find it interesting as data people, but like it's tough to find stuff that resonates with the customer. So just kind of keeping it simple is usually the best success ratio, I think.
And it sort of goes back to your thing before of, what is the best chart? It depends on what data you're trying to show.
Yeah, for sure.
Question 2, what's one Tableau feature you think is underrated and why?
Oh, it's parameters. It's totally parameters. Parameters make Tableau so much more powerful than Power BI. I think it's one of the key features of Tableau is because you can do so much with parameters, and it makes your analysis like much more user friendly because it gives power to the users to change the way the analysis happens very flexibly. So I think parameters.
Perfect. And what skills outside of Tableau do you think make someone better at using Tableau? So is it SQL, design, storytelling? What is it?
SQL is, I think, important for like knowing, just having that kind of concept of how the data should be structured so that you can visualize it better in Tableau. So it's kind of SQL, or it's kind of having that understanding about how the data sources work and how they should be structured. Like if you think about like accountants and financial guys, they always like to see these tables where you have, a bunch of rows and then your months as columns. But we know that, that's terrible for a data source, and we always want to unpivot that. So just kind of having that, knowledge of how the data source should be set up, that also saves you time when you're building, right? Because you can say, well, I want to see the data in this format.
Yep. And number 4, what's your approach to creating responsive dashboards for different devices? You sort of touched on that as well.
We rarely have users like business users that are on like their phones. Right. It's more often like we'll have like, sales executives or C-suite that are on iPads. and consuming their dashboards. So like, one of my checklist items was like designed for that 1K screen, like, 1800 by 1000 resolution. That's actually a little bit too big for an iPad, right? So if you try to put that resolution on an iPad, you have a scroll left, right problem. So that's thinking about the iPad as like a consumer device and potentially designing for that, I think is important, but it's more just talking to the users and seeing, how are you going to access this dashboard? Like, what kind of devices are you using, and making sure you account for that.
Mm-hmm. And finally, how has the Tableau community influenced your learning or career?
I talked about that a little bit at the beginning of the presentation, but like, I think it's the community has been really good for, if you have questions about how you should do something, you can go to the forums and you can get those kind of questions answered. User groups a great way to like share and learn from other people about what they're doing. And I think that, again, that's one of the things that makes Tableau unique, is you don't have that with other products. Like, Power BI, for example, there's Microsoft forums, but everything on there is out of date or incorrect, right? Like the Tableau, having the community forums is like a gold mine for just figuring out how to do stuff and how things can be done.
Yep, no, that's cool. In the chat, she asked, she said, I try to manage my Tableau, my dashboard checklist to maintain quality. How often do I go over your dashboard? How often do you go over your dashboard checklist?
It's we're kind of, I think we're kind of constantly, looking at that and what's in there and refining it. It's not something that's like a static document that doesn't change over time. That's something that, like, the whole team is kind of welcome to contribute to and work on. We haven't really done a formal review process lately, but it's definitely not something that's like set in stone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Perfect. And just to wrap up, so our next tug is Ludo talking about data visualization to understand music. Again, depends on where you are in the world. Obviously, it's just one meeting, but obviously some US folks are not going to wake up at very early in the morning to attend. But it's more suited for an Australian and European audience. But with everything we do, including this session, everything else, and a whole heap of other online tugs as well, it's all on YouTube at youtube.com/teamdatafam. There's different playlists for all the different tugs, or just go through and watch the content as you need to. If you're not near a computer or YouTube, there's always the Spotify or the Apple Podcasts. And as I said at the start, if you want to present something, please email me at team.datafam and we'll find a slot for you. But thank you, Fraser, for that. That was awesome. I was, sort of, in a way, it was one of the things I was wanting to see at TC, but I didn't go this year. So it's really good to catch up on that as well.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Awesome. But one more thing is, as we said, IronViz. If I refresh my screen right now, there is no IronViz news yet. So let's go back to October the 6th, when Tableau said it would be announced today. And that's what they tweeted, with the big IronViz logo in it. So I would think that later today, tonight, wherever you are in the world, there's going to be some news, right? I would hope.
Hopefully. There's nothing on Slack.
There's nothing on Slack. There's nothing on Twitter.
Larissa's like the VP, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, she responded and said, "We have not announced the theme yet. Stay tuned. It will be announced very soon." That's 4 minutes ago. So very soon.
The joke with most people on my side of the world is it's not October 20 anymore. It's October 21. I know that Tableau always talks in Seattle time, so it's actually not the end of the day in October 20 yet, but we're getting there very soon. Hopefully it will be announced very soon. It sounds like food, but you never really know.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for attending. Feel free to unmute and talk about anything else you need to talk about. But if not, that's the end of the meeting for today.
Thanks, Fraser. That was amazing content.
All right. Thank you.
Good to see you again as well. Ciao.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Well, if that's it, that's the end of it for today. Thank you very much for attending, everyone, and we'll see you at another tug in the future.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All
Ciao.
right.
Okay, thanks a lot, guys.
Bye-bye.